We entitled this Driving the Transportation Planning Process. That's about as clever as we're going to get for the next hour, so enjoy that. That's it. Before we get going, I'd like to know how many of you, I'm primarily going to be talking about MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, and some what they do, but I'm also going to be talking a little more broadly about transportation planning in general, and that's going to have applicability to those of you from non-metropolitan counties, because you do a lot of the similar things on your own that MPOs do for the counties that are amongst their membership. So how many of you, just by show of hands, live in a county that is covered by an MPO?
Or TPO.
That was my next question, see? So I was going to say, or a TPO, and I might see more hands there. From the federal government's perspective, you're the same. TPOs are just MPOs by a different name. It's marketing. You've just decided to call yourself something else. So MPOs, TPOs, we have TPA out there, one TPA. We have Gainesville that calls himself an MTPO. We have the MPO in Orlando that calls themselves MetroPlan Orlando. And so there's no MPO, TPO, none of that. They're just another agency. And how many of you are from a non-metropolitan county, a county that doesn't have an MPO or a TPO? About 4 of you. So are you near an MPO county? Are you next door to a county that's an MPO? Do you know? So you might want to... You're next to each other. You only have one boundary? You must... All right, so you might want to try to find out if one of your neighbors is an MPO, because rural counties and MPOs also do some collaboration, some work across lines. And if you understood what they're doing, then you might have a better opportunity to engage with them. So, and how many of you are actually members of your MPO or TPO? So I've got several of you. Okay, so I'm talking to the right audience, at least half of you. And for those of you who I recognize who've attended our MPOAC Institute, I'm sorry, you're going to be hearing an hour of a very short version of what we do for that entire weekend. And maybe it's a little bit of... we are... Okay, that's an inside joke. So those that attend the Institute know that on Saturday of that day that weekend we played Jeopardy.
Yes, we do.
And you lost. I'm sorry. Losing not so valuable prizes. And no, we don't have time for Jeopardy. But so those skills, while refined and would be useful in real life, I'm sure. Not today. So let's go ahead and get started. And one of the first things we walk people through who attend our institute is, why does this thing exist? Why are we here at all? And I don't mean that just as an existential question, right? Why do we all exist? But why are there MPOs? Why it's the oddest duck out there, okay? It's required in federal law. It's enshrined in state statute, and it operates at the regional level with a governing board comprised of locally elected officials. Is there another agency quite like that? I'm not aware of them. So why did we get here? So for those of you who've gone through this historical journey, I've shortened it here for the purposes of fitting in an hour. So we're going to go back, and our previous speaker gave us a little bit of history about federal programs and federal funding. We're going to step back to the emergence of the Interstate Highway Program. This is a 1950s concept. As John told you, the federal government has been involved in transportation, primarily in the funding of transportation projects. Well, gosh, I didn't know, from a road from, where was it, Pensacola to St. Augustine for a long time, right? But really, probably a good and useful place to start is the inception of the interstates. We're following World War II. Eisenhower's president. He's seen the German Autobahn and thought, oh, that's pretty good. And we're also living in a time when, we're entering the Cold War. And we're concerned about a variety of things. We have a lot of soldiers coming back. We need jobs. They're coming back, and we want to grow our economy. We've come out of the Depression. And, what is transportation all about if not economic development, moving people and moving goods? And with the added dose of Cold War concerns about evacuation, because the defense aspect of this isn't really about moving tanks or missiles. It's about evacuating people. It's about getting people out of urban centers as quickly as possible in the event of something catastrophic happening. So you pull those things together, commerce, economy, concern about national defense, and we end up with the interstate highway system being designated in the late 40s, or in 1956, finally, the agitation going on for a while, a 41,000-mile system, and direct funding, a highway trust fund established, fed by that 18.3 cents that John talked about of federal gas tax. It wasn't 18.3 cents at that point. In 1993, it was increased to 18.3 cents, and it has not increased since then. And please understand, the national gas tax, the federal gas tax, is pennies per gallon, not per dollar, it's not a percentage of the purchase price. So as John was saying, as price goes up, typically revenue actually decreases a bit, and as fuel efficiency goes up in our vehicles, we collect less money. So understand how that works. So what happens? We put the interstates out there, but they follow the same approach that they've always followed, with the choice of routes being left to the states. So the money's coming from the federal government, but the decision on where to put the facilities, the roads, is being made by the state. And there's some very limited coordinated planning required at that time. Now, this is real high-level coordination. In other words, let's make sure the interstate coming south out of Georgia matches up with the interstate going north out of Florida. Doesn't do this, okay? So real limited coordination. Well, what happens when they start putting the interstate in, okay? We start to get some conflicts arising, because the state is making decisions, but in some cases, the interstates are coming through and bisecting communities, and in other cases, they're bypassing communities. So this is a picture from South Florida. This actually isn't an interstate, but it makes my point, so it's a good picture. And you don't really want to live here. And you probably don't want to live right here, but this whole community now has this thing running right through the center of it, okay? So we're impacting local communities by the location of the interstate system. Another example that Scott likes to use when he gives this presentation is, has anybody seen the movie, Pixar movie Cars? Yes. Right, animated talking cars. But it is an example of the interstate bypassing a small town. This was a thriving town in the movie. Commerce coming through, roads coming, vehicles passing through. Interstate gets built, bypasses Radiator Springs in this movie, and it sees hard times. Okay, so that's an example of the bypassing. So cities and counties, whoever's sort of in charge here, start to seek a voice in the decision-making process. And they're using primarily regional advisory bodies, councils of government, regional planning councils to kind of band together and try to have a voice in this process. But they don't. The decisions have been left up to the state, and the state is making decisions that may or may not be the ones that the local communities would have been making. Now, I'm not trying to cast the state as the bad guy. They aren't the bad guy. But it does create conflict, and this is because of different priorities. So it's all a matter of perspective, okay? And John was talking about that a little bit. So those who are the proponents of the interstate system are saying, look, we need a more efficient way to move goods and people. We are booming for manufacturing. We need people to come in and out. Florida depends on people being able to get here, to get to the beaches, to get to, we've got a growing tourist economy. The economic impact of these project expenditures and the existence of the interstate is undeniable, and they are focused on getting projects done, okay, project completion. So anything that gets in the way, slows down project completion is not desirable, not from the perspective of the state, and not from the perspective of those who are interested, those economic interests for moving vehicles. Well, the opponents of the interstate system, or proponents, these are stronger words than probably I even want to use, but those that have concerns are worried about the adverse impacts to neighborhoods and to farmland in agricultural areas, loss of valuable land, not just agricultural land, this is the loss of taxable land. Okay, so as the interstate's coming through, you've got acres and acres of what was property that used to pay local property tax that isn't anymore. And so they can have a large cumulative effect on local government's revenue stream. And then urban traffic congestion, because the interstate is really, really good at moving people and trucks. And then you get off. You get off the interstate, well, the urban transportation network isn't keeping up. And so you've got more and increasing congestion at those areas where the interchanges are. So, so we've got conflict, and Congress is hearing it from counties, from cities, from city councils, from mayors, from rural communities that are being bypassed, and they say, we want a voice in this decision-making process. So in the 1973 Highway Act, they create MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, for areas over 50,000 in population. Now that isn't the population of your city, and it's not the population of your county. It's the population as defined by the census urbanized area, okay? So it's simply based on density. The census uses certain criteria, and they draw really squirrely boundaries around areas based on population density. Any one of those areas, census-defined urbanized area that is over 50,000 has to be covered by an MPO. It requires MPOs to approach transportation from a multimodal perspective, looking at a variety of ways of moving people. We do a better job in MPOs now of doing that than we did in the 50s, in the 70s. So that's an evolution that MPOs are taking on. And it allocates funds from the Highway Trust Fund for the purpose of funding the planning activities of MPOs. PL funds, federal planning funds. And this is what your MPO staff pay themselves. That's how you're paying for salaries. That's how you're paying for studies. That's how you're paying to update your long-range plan. Your transportation improvement program is these federal planning dollars. There's some transit planning dollars. Some of you have local dues or other local sources of funding that you're kicking into that mix in order to expand what you're doing. So that's just like the interstate system was successful because there was dedicated revenue stream from the Highway Trust Fund. MPOs are not going to do nothing because there's money attached to it. And everybody wants the planning funds to be flowing. You have to be doing what is required in law for that. But it's a start. There's a voice. The MPOs are formed to discuss transportation projects in the area, to develop a long-range transportation plan, to decide what do we want to be when we grow up, okay? And we'll talk about the plan here in a few minutes. And then the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program, which is where you put money actually on specific projects. much like the DOT's work program, and in fact, for any federal funds to be spent in an MPO area, the project needs to appear both in the long-range transportation plan and in the TIP. And it really doesn't matter whether it's in DOT's work program or not. Okay, it has to appear in the MPO's documents. It then appears in the DOT's work program and ultimately in what they call the STIP, which is a statewide transportation improvement program, which is the roll-up of all the MPO's TIPs and the state's work program in non-metropolitan areas. So ICE-T in 1991, this is the name of the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act of 1991, what they called ICE-T. This is the federal authorization law, the law that governs the federal transportation program. So how the money's spent and how we plan for it and how we pay for things. So since '73, the MPOs have existed, but they haven't had much authority. They've been planning and they've been programming, but they haven't been handed a great deal of power. But their voice is being heard. So local voices are being heard in the decision-making process. Well, ICE-T's sort of the sea change. It hands a lot more power and authority and responsibility to the MPOs and more money. And this is the point when John was talking about federal money flowing directly to urbanized areas. This is when that happens under ICE-T. So it changed the lines of authority and responsibility. It enhanced the roles of the MPOs. It gave greater flexibility in the spending of federal dollars. You can spend it on this or this: bike paths, roads, bus lanes, intermodal centers, traffic signals, a variety of things, and established more stringent guidelines for the MPO in their planning process. So the federal government, when they give you more authority, they usually give you more responsibility. It's the yin and yang. You want more to do, great, here's more to do, and here's you also have to follow more regulations. So generally recognized, like I said, as a big change in transportation policy. So now MPOs and DOTs are really having to coordinate and cooperate with each other in urbanized areas. At the same time, ICE-T gives more responsibility and some more voice to rural counties. Okay, so during the weekend, we talk about make a distinction between cooperative processes and in collaboration or in coordination with others. So with the MPOs, it is a cooperative process. So a different C, consultation, I'm sorry. So ICE-T interjected the language that said in non-metropolitan areas, DOT is still the lead agency, but in consultation with I'm trying to think of the exact language. I think it's local officials with transportation responsibility. And so this is why DOT, as they develop their work program, they now come to local jurisdictions, non-metropolitan local jurisdictions, and ask for your priorities. Then they come back and they say, here's what the work program looks like in your county, because they need to consult you. They don't need to listen, but they need to consult. They need to hear you. And I think DOT, by and large, does a very good job of both coming to you and consulting, but also listening to you. Again, as John was saying, from district to district, this is going to be a relationship that isn't identical. So make friends with your DOT district folks, okay? That'll help. So changes over the year. We've had reauthorization since ICE-T. We had T21 and SAFE-T-LU, so they were very into the ICE-T idea through the reauthorization language. And those generally preserved and enhanced the role of MPOs. And then they modified some various provisions of the law, basically streamlining things. They're trying to cut things down, try to enhance the environmental decision-making process to streamline it. There's a lot of laws you have to follow. Americans with Disabilities Act, NEPA documents, the National Environmental Policy Act, and many, many more efforts are made in these laws to try to increase the speed with which these decisions can be made. Remember, in all this time, I always remind the people at the MPOAC Institute, and when I'm talking to them, DOT, y'all get frustrated when things don't happen quickly. And DOT will remind you, before there were MPOs, they could get stuff done way faster because they didn't have to go through you. So you, are, from the DOT's perspective, are an impediment to getting projects done quickly. So sometimes you don't want quick, or as quick as you think you want. You do want that voice. And so there has to be a balance there. I'd also would tell you, with the advent of MPOs is an increased emphasis on public involvement. Engaging the public in decision making, that is one of the key roles that the MPO plays, is getting the public involved in decision making. So MAP 21, moving ahead for progress in the 21st century, replaced all the 3 T bills, and it was approved in 2012. It was essentially a 2-year bill. You heard me right. It was a 2012. It was a little over 2-year bill. It's 2015 now, so it has been extended 3 times since it expired a little over a year ago in September 30th of 2014. It basically reorganized and consolidated a lot of the funding categories that were in existence under the T-bills, so it pushed bridges under a different program that existed before, added some more flexibility. For the first time ever, there were no earmarks in MAP 21, so there was no congressional allocation of funds to specific projects in MAP 21. And it required performance-based planning and programming. Now, we're still waiting to find out exactly what that means because the rules haven't been fully promulgated for what performance-based planning and programming means. There are a variety of categories that performance measures are being developed at the federal level and then will come down to the states and MPO level. We know, for example, at safety, it's looking at fatalities and serious injury accidents, both the number and the rate of fatalities and serious injury accidents. We're not sure about the rest. That hasn't all come out. It does create, for those of you who are in non-metropolitan areas, it permits the creation of regional transportation planning organizations, what are called RTPOs. States like Iowa, I believe North Carolina, and some other areas of the country have created RTPOs on their own. This would happen, but it permits it in federal law. To date, we don't have any RTPOs in Florida, and it would have to come with the collaboration with DOT. So it's been extended until November 20th, MAP 21 was. 3 weeks ago, they did an extension, I think it was 3 or a month ago, an extension to November 20th. If I'm doing my math right, that's tomorrow. So, and since that time it was extended, the House has passed its own reauthorization bill. The Senate has passed its own reauthorization bill. They have appointed conferees to a conference committee to work out the differences between the two bills. I checked, I Googled right before I got up here. I have no idea how that's going. I do not think that they have extended beyond tomorrow the timeline, but I think that they will likely have to. So my guess would be they will do an additional extension to give them time to work out the differences between the two bills. In all likelihood, another short few week extension to try to work it out. But they are making progress. So give them credit. Prior to MAP 21, when Safety Lou expired. It took 2.5 years before we had another reauthorization. There was multiple extensions. So this one's only gone slightly over a year. That's half the time it took them last time. So I guess thumbs up for Congress on moving forward. So themes in transportation policy in the 20th century. So we acknowledge this tension between local and state perspectives without being good guys and bad guys, different perspectives. So when you don't agree with DOT at the county level, at the local level, the MPO level, it was sort of meant to be that way. They wanted to introduce new perspectives, so you could struggle it out. Not to mention, you're sitting on a board that has maybe multiple counties, probably multiple cities. You all have to work that out amongst yourselves too, even at that level. So acknowledge tension, acknowledge need for regional coordination across those boundaries, and a commitment to planning. And at the state level, you'll do that. An organization called the MPO Advisory Council, the MPO AC, has been established so that the chair or the chair's appointee from every MPO in the state attends on a quarterly basis to work out statewide policy with implications for the for planning and funding of transportation projects. Is there anybody here from the Heartland Regional TPO area? Do you know one of the Heartland counties? So y'all are the newest MPO in the state, number 27 over here. So that's important. 27. We have more MPOs in Florida than any other state in the country, and that's primarily because we have more single county MPOs than any other state in the country. Most MPOs cover multiple counties, multiple jurisdictions. We have more single.
What about Duval County?
Yes, Duval County is the North Florida TPO that covers Clay, St. John's, Duval, and Nassau County.
So they don't have one? They don't have
You have four counties in a single MPO here. So I'm not looking at, I'm not sure what I did with my phone, so I'm not sure where I am on time here. So if anybody has any, it's what? 3:20. Okay, so I've got until 4 o'clock, so I'm okay. I'm on pace. Does everybody have any questions on that history question? At least at this point, do you understand why MPOs exist? Okay. Any questions? Anybody have? Okay, we'll keep moving. I know. So we're just basically going to give you a real high view of the authority and responsibilities of MPOs at this point, okay? So like I said, if your population is over 50,000 people, again, this is not the population of your city or your county, but in the census urbanized area, you have to have an MPO. That's Gainesville. If your area is larger than 200,000, they give you a different name, and they call you a transportation management area. Doesn't matter. Got a few more rules, little more money. You're a TMA. But they still call you an MPO. You still call yourself an MPO. Just means you got some extra rules and some extra money. So, and MPOs are designated by agreement between the governor, typically represented by the state DOT, and local jurisdictions, local governments within that area. This is just a map of the, this is the urbanized area that covers Orlando. This is the urbanized area that covers Kissimmee. And this is the area that Metro Plan Orlando, which is the MPO that covers that area. They have a 3-county MPO, Osceola, Seminole, and Orange. You can see the boundary around them. You can also see in various colors of green the MPOs that border on them and the urbanized areas that come very close to their neighbors. So if we were in another state, the Atlanta Regional Commission covers 13 counties. Very large area, nearly a third of Georgia is under the ARC. So that's an enormous MPO. Here in Florida, we tend to have very small single county MPOs. Just so you know, you don't have to do it the same way. Federal law is very flexible, and we're going to discuss that. So in this next series of slides, you'll notice it either says Florida law on top or it says federal law on top. So I'm going to roll through. So the 50,000 population, all that's federal law. It's enumerated and repeated in Florida law and Florida statutes. And then some additional policies are that you have to do it by interlocal agreement, which is a formal way to reach agreements between jurisdictions in Florida. Other states use memorandums of understanding and a variety of other legal tools that are relevant to their own situation. In federal law, if you're a TMA, so one of those big 200,000 MPOs, which, by the way, all but 9 MPOs in the state are in a TMA area. So really, there's only a very small handful of MPOs that don't reach that 200,000 population threshold. You have to have local elected officials that sit on the MPO governing board, officials of public agencies that administer or operate major modes of transportation, blah, 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 real long. It means a modal authority. So if you have a transit authority, an airport authority, a seaport authority, an expressway authority, they are on your board. And appropriate state officials. So that's federal law. So for example, in North Florida here, the Jacksonville Transportation Authority, JTA, is a voting member of the North Florida TPO. Where I'm from in Tampa, the Seaport Authority, the Airport Authority, the Transit Authority, and the Expressway Authority all have seats at the MPO table. Okay. Do you have questions?
Is
or?
now the time to ask the question?
You bring it.
I'm just curious. Now, in our Sarasota Manatee, our MPO,
Yes.
on our MPO, we do have someone from the Airport Authority.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to assume because the county commissioners in Manatee are also the Port Authority.
Yes.
Is that why we don't have a separate?
You are represented by the counties because those are departments of the county, right?
Okay, but we don't have a separate person
No.
like a port executive.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So in those cases, I'm sorry, I'm feeling a cough come on, so get ahead of that. So if your transit agency is a department of the county, or if, for example, in Broward County, Port Everglades is a department of the county, it's not a separate authority. It does not have the head of that department or that agency is represented by a county commissioner, just as as Public Works or any other department would be represented by a county commissioner. So that's basically the representation on your from your county board is representing, in addition to the county, the agencies of the county, which may include any of these modal operators. So under Florida law, we have just a few extra rules beyond federal law. You can only have, the MPO board must be between 5 and 25 members. I don't know how they decided these were the right numbers. They are. They're in state statute. As a rule, voting members must be elected officials of general purpose local government. So your sheriff, your property appraiser, your tax collector, they don't get seats on the MPO. Local, general purpose local governments. Why is that in state statute? Because a few years ago there was a sheriff who wanted a seat on an MPO. So they passed the law that said no. Local, general purpose local government.
For what reason? I'm curious.
Why did he want to be on it? Maybe because he runs a lot of runs a large fleet of vehicles over the transportation network. I don't know why. But in some places they do have the school board sitting on the MPO board because they run the largest fleet of buses in the whole county. So, and they're not part of the county structure. They're run by the board of school board. So they have them on as a separate board. That's up to you in your bylaws, how you decide that works. County commissioners must not be less than 1/3 of the MPO membership. There are exceptions to that. For example, if your county board is only 5 county commissioners and your MPO board is 24 people, the math doesn't work. So long as everybody's on the board, that's an exception, and that's okay. So alternation of municipal representation is permitted. So there's several MPOs out there that have, for example, maybe barrier islands, and they rotate a seat through the mayors of those barrier island communities. Things like that are out there. Area modal authorities may have voting membership. Remember, federal law says modal authorities need to be on the board. It doesn't say whether they need to have a vote or not. They need to be represented and participating in the process. Florida's laws say you may have a vote on the board. Representatives of DOT serve as non-voting advisors. In federal law, it says appropriate state officials. Why would in Florida they be non-voting advisors? Sunshine Law. If they were sitting in the capacity either with a vote or even as a non-voting member, then you as county commissioners could not speak with the state DOT, the district secretary, because it would be a violation of sunshine laws for anything that might become before the MPO. So they are designated in state law as non-voting advisors, and you can talk to them all you want. Other non-voting advisors may be appointed to the MPO, so you can bring on people to participate in the conversation as a non-voting advisor all you want. And then finally, MPOs contained entirely within very large charter counties can make their own rules. And that affects Broward and Miami-Dade and maybe 1 or 2 other counties. It's not too many. Duval, but Duval is involved in a 4-county MPO as it is. So they would have to back out and re-back in. It would be complicated, but yes, it could happen. So additional organization requirements under Florida law. You thought I was done with one slide, right? I had more. You have to have a technical advisory committee. This technical advisory committee is basically your planners, your engineers, public works directors, emergency responders, anybody who brings technical professional advice to the MPO board, because in the end, the MPO board makes decisions. But they should be hearing on a regular, formalized basis from people with professional opinions on the decisions they're making. That's your job, is to get that input from other people. So the state statute said, got to have a technical advisory board so you can hear from them. You also have to have a citizens advisory board, which has to be broadly representative of affected areas and interests. It must include minorities, and handicapped, must be adequately represented on the Citizens Advisory Committee, and members serve at the pleasure of the MPO. So you have decided, there are probably bylaws in your MPO related to how the Citizens Advisory Committee is formed, and then, but I just want to remind you, this is often a place where somebody helped you out in your campaign. Oh, let's give them a seat here on the Citizens Advisory Committee. But I would remind you, if they're not showing up, if they're not participating, get somebody who will. Okay, this is an important function to feed to you the perspective of the public in when you're deliberating important transportation decisions. So broad responsibility under federal law is to manage the 3C planning process. So it is continuing. So this is when you're sitting there and you are having discussions about whatever you're having discussions about that is impacting transportation, whether you're talking about a specific road, whether the airport is going to expand, economic development, are there going to be express lanes in your community on the interstates, a whole variety of things. But remember, it is continuing. It doesn't stop. You continue to meet on your regular basis and discuss whatever is significant in the transportation arena. It is comprehensive. It covers all aspects. So it doesn't have to be under the jurisdiction or the authority of the MPO to have the conversation about it. So if the airport's talking about expanding and you want to have a conversation about what does that mean for the neighborhoods around it, what does that mean for the surface transportation network that feeds onto the airport, how many more cars can we expect to be coming out? Rental cars are going to be rented. Where are they going? Have them there. The MPO has the authority to have this comprehensive discussion, and it's cooperative. It is cooperative with neighboring jurisdictions, with other agencies, with DOT, with your fire departments, with your police departments, with your school board, et cetera. You have to prepare a metropolitan transportation plan. That's the language in federal law, an MTP. In Florida, we call it a long-range transportation plan. It's the same thing. Okay, so don't let people fool you with an MTP. It's just another acronym. It's all the same thing. And then preparing a shorter range transportation improvement program. And I'll kind of break each down in a separate slide here in a moment. Additional broad responsibilities that all transportation plan. This is under federal law that must take into account civil rights. It must take into account environmental impacts and preservation. And it must be consistent with adopted growth management and economic development plans. For anybody who will be attending the Institute someday, these are Jeopardy questions. So make sure you're paying attention because it's gonna, and people get mad at us when we say no, that's wrong, and like, it was there. So I'm giving you all fair warning. Florida law, it basically repeats the 3C process language. It says you have to produce plans and programs that give emphasis to facilities that serve important national, state, regional transportation functions. I have a speaker who is following me today who is going to be talking about the Florida Transportation Plan and the strategic intermodal system. This is the strategic intermodal system. It doesn't say strategic intermodal system in state statute in this particular place, but this is what that means, okay? So you have to give emphasis to that in your planning and programming activities. You have to produce plans and programs that are consistent with your local comp plans. So state law says pay attention to what the local comp plans have in them while you're developing your plans and programs. And it institutionalizes that forum for having a cooperative discussion. Federal law needs to be open, public, and inclusive. Remember what I told you. NPOs are there to facilitate the public's involvement in transportation decision-making. That's in federal law, and there's a variety of planning factors, which if I don't run out of time, I'll cover at the end of this conversation. If I don't, you've got the handout. You can read them. So I want to make sure that I'm leaving enough time for Dana to talk. You must fulfill, this is good, I love this one. So this is Florida law, and they basically say you must fulfill all requirements necessary to receive federal money. So the state has said, whatever the federal government says you have to do to get federal money, do that, okay? That's what that means. You had a question?
Yeah, because you mentioned the advisory board for the NGOs. You mentioned the elderly minorities on that advisory board.
Yeah, it's in state statute that there should be adequate representation on your Citizens Advisory Committee from those communities.
Okay, is that broke down into districts, or it has to be someone on there?
It doesn't go into that level of detail. That's up to you to decide. How do you want to ensure that elderly people are represented, the elderly population is represented? And I guess you could say, well, we need to put somebody on here who's elderly, or more likely you have somebody on there from one of the many providers of services for elderly members of your community, representing that community in the Citizens Advisory Committee. Okay. So I would recommend, if you have a question about that, going back and talking to your TPO director and asking them
Well,
how
I recommend the
do you do
minority
that?
for the advisory board. I got to make sure this person is on there.
Yeah, I don't know who's on your, because there, like I said, there are 27 MPOs in the state. I'm not familiar with the makeup of all of them.
That statute you're talking about, on there.
339.175. It's you can read it right there. It talks about your citizen advisory committee and what is required there.
339?
.175. That's right. And we're on tape, so you can always go back and look at the tape. So you got to do whatever it takes to be bringing in the federal money. You have to follow the sunshine laws, public records laws. You must participate in the planning and programming of transportation facilities of a whole bunch of modes. So a lot of this, the MPO staff are achieving by they are participating in discussions about with the transit agency, with the airport authority. But many of you sit on other boards. Okay, so you're a county commissioner, you sit on the MPO board, but maybe you also sit on the Expressway Authority board, or you sit on the Transit Authority board. You wear multiple hats. Bring what you're talking about in one meeting into the other meeting. And to say, well, a week ago at the MPO, we talked about this. So people, it's amazing to me how frequently I see the same people having different conversations. It's like, did you forget you had this conversation last week in a different venue? Bring that here. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you could certainly say, look, at the Transit Authority board, we had this discussion when you're sitting on the MPO. So let it cross-pollinate. Federal law, MTP, what we call in Florida LRTP. It needs to look at least 20 years out. Most of you have recently adopted a 2040 long-range transportation plan, or you're going to within the next couple of years, next year or two. It must be updated at least every 4 or 5 years. Again, federal law. And then affordable with reasonably expected resources and performance-based. This means you can't spend money you don't think you're going to have over the next 20 plus years. So you have to do a financial plan as part of your plan to estimate not only what things in the plan will cost, but how are we going to have the money to pay for it. So Transportation Improvement Program, this is shorter. This is federal law. It must cover at least 4 years and must be updated at least every 4 years, which makes sense because if you updated it less frequently, you'd have years that don't have a TIP. It must also be affordable with reasonably expected resources. And as I mentioned, it must be performance-based, whatever that means in federal statute. You have to have a unified planning work program. This is commonly thought of as your budget for your MPO, but it should be a strategic document, because if you're paying for your staff to do certain things, they should be leading you toward a certain end, right? So everything should be leading toward what you put in the plan and what you're funding in terms of projects out there, and your UPWP, your budget that you're paying your staff to do studies with, and that should be also leading to the goals that are enumerated in your plan. So think of it that way as well. It must be under federal law updated periodically, and it could be 1 or 2 years. And you also have to have a participation plan. You have to have a plan that outlines how are you going to be reaching out to the public for their input. Okay? That's under federal law. Under Florida law, we basically have the same rules for the long-range plan. 20 plus years, updated 4 or 5 years. It depends on actually the 4 or the 5 years depends on the quality of your air. If you're not in attainment for air quality by federal law, you have to update it every 4 years. If you are in attainment every 5 years, all 27 MPOs in Florida are in attainment on a 5-year update cycle currently. So the TIP, remember the TIP in federal law must be at least 4 years. In Florida, it's a 5-year program. So it can cover in federal law it's no less than 4 years, so it could be longer. Here it's 5 years, and it is updated every year. Every year. You drop the current year, you add a new 5th year. For those of you who attended the Institute, you know I walked through a whole cycle of what that looks like. So for any of you who are in or on an MPO who haven't attended the Institute, you want a really detailed view at how that works, attend the Institute. Your UPWP must be updated annually by state law, but we have 2-year UPWPs, and I didn't say that's not illegal, but technically, I guess it might be, but everybody's doing it, and it seems to be working out pretty well. It saves your staff the responsibility of updating it every year. And it must all be done in cooperation with DOT, and that's a very important requirement. Additional responsibilities in Florida law, you all have to do a congestion management process. Actually, this is something that is required of only TMAs, those MPOs larger than 200,000 in federal law. Well, at least one, if not both of the proposals from the Senate and the House do away with the congestion management process in federal law. But it's still in Florida law, so we would have to continue doing it until that changes. So keep that in mind. You have required to provide whatever assistance the DOT asks for, so your staff will often be in a number of ways, whether it's cooperative transportation modeling, data sharing, a variety of ways that DOT and MPO staff cooperate and provide assistance. You have to make sure that the jurisdictions are represented in the process, perform all other duties required by state or federal law. That sounds a lot like the other one that says, make sure you do what you have to do to get the money. This also says, do what you have to do to make sure that you're not doing things illegally. So do what you have to do. So I promised to talk just briefly about the planning factors under federal law that we have to follow. There are 8. So when you're doing your plan, when you're doing your program, when you're talking about anything related to transportation in your MPO process, very first planning factor is economic vitality. This is also a Jeopardy answer, so just keep that in mind. Economic vitality. It starts with economic vitality, it ends with economic vitality. Transportation is what we've built our economy on. Commerce flows over our transportation network. People commute to jobs, people go shopping, people go take vacations. It's all connected by our transportation network. So it's very, very important. Economic vitality. Safety is a very important planning factor, and security. Well, what is the difference? What is the difference? Right, so safety is related to things like fatalities on the roadway. Pedestrian crossings, are they safe? Can people see you? Are we operating our vehicles at safe speeds? Security, on the other hand, is, are we protected from outside interference? For example, if we had a New York-style subway system, would our stations be vulnerable to terrorist attack? Are our transportation systems vulnerable to hurricanes? Are we able to move, are we able to evacuate people in the event of forest fires? This is security, okay? So distinction between safety and security. And then accessibility and mobility options. We are trying to put out and create a robust transportation system that can move people and make all areas of our metropolitan area accessible by as many members of the public as possible. This also includes things like these complete streets, and we like the little complete streets. They feel great. We want all those little cafes to succeed. So how are we getting the trucks in there to get them the food and the supplies they need, right? So that's also wrapped up in that whole concept. So the environment, energy, conservation, quality of life, and consistency with other plans. that is a long, in my ear, that's more than one factor, but that's basically all this other stuff you have to consider, and we didn't know where to put, so it's all here in one planning factor. Integration and connectivity, the transportation system. Can I get off the bus and get on the train? Can I get out of the airplane and get into a rental car and take that to where I want to go? Or can I take the tram, and does that bring me to the seaport where I get on a cruise ship? Is it interconnected? Okay. Efficient management and operation of the system. If you're driving on the interstates these days, there are big overhead signs that are telling you there's an accident up ahead. We've got, I think it's Jacksonville that just opened a large transportation center, right? Where they're monitoring the streets with videos. They're changing the signals to manage the flow of traffic throughout the system. So it's efficient management and operation of the system is a planning factor, and then preservation of the system. We have miles and miles and miles of existing transportation infrastructure, and we need to keep the funding going to keep those investments relevant moving forward, right? I mean, what's the point of building new roads if you're going to let the old roads just fall apart? Okay, so planning factors under Florida law, it basically restates a lot of federal law. The CIS facilities must be given priority as a planning factor in Florida law. Regional cooperation is encouraged. So several of the MPOs across the state have joined into associations that pull multiple MPOs together. So for example, the Orlando, the East Central Florida area, there's an agency now called the Central Florida MPO Alliance, and they get together and talk on a quarterly basis. In Southeast Florida, there's this CEFTEC, the Southeast Florida Transportation Council, with the 3 MPOs covering Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward getting together on a regular basis and doing regional cooperation. And then other important considerations are described. If anybody's really, really interested in knowing why MPOs exist from this state's perspective, read that preamble. It's really enlightening why they think MPOs exist, and it should govern how you do your job as well. That's the end of my talk. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if you have any questions you think of later, feel free to email me. It's just Kramer@Cutter, which is CUTR.USF.edu. We are right on the USF campus. We have a building there. I'm faculty. Happy to respond to any questions you have.
Wonderful. Thank